Okay. So we have Pamela Patterson joining us tonight. She's on the East Coast as well, I believe, so a couple hours ahead. So thank you for a late night with us. I won't read through the whole description. I'll let Pam introduce herself for the most part, but we've been very lucky to have Pam present to us several times over the last few years. Always great content, and we always look forward to the next one. She's written 6 books. 2 of them are international bestsellers. We had a topic a year or so ago about it, and we raffled off a few of those books. So if you want to look her up on LinkedIn, you can. But Pam, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Steve. And it's always a pleasure to come back and see you folks again. It's always been a warm welcome. So I'm going to get my presentation set up here. I think, can you see everything?
Yep.
Okay, great. And I did want to say a couple of words about, before we get started even, I wanted to say a couple of words about the job and the job markets and resumes. And I wrote a book called Get the Job, How to Optimize Your Resume for the Online Job Search. And it was an international bestseller. And I'm not selling my book here. It's actually available for free if you're a Kindle Unlimited member. So you might want to check that out. It kind of helps you navigate through the HR bots and what to look at in terms of increasing your ranking in those systems. Okay, so that might be something you want to take a look at. And if you read it, and special offer for the people on the call tonight, if you read the book and talk about what you learned in a testimonial on Amazon, then I'm willing to give you an hour free consultation if that's of any interest. But anyway, thank you, Steve, for inviting me. I hope someday I'll be live in California instead of cold Canada, but that's okay. We're going to talk about improving quality and requirements using business analysis techniques tonight. And I've worked for over 50 companies. I'm a business systems analyst as well as a project manager. I have a background in chemistry, information design, systems engineering, communications. I've been kind of all over. I couldn't make up my mind. And I'm also writing a book about stakeholder interviewing that will be published by IIBA likely in the spring. So take a look out for that if you're interested in that. So there are a lot of reasons that projects fail. There is scope creep, indecisiveness, unrealistic deadlines, poor risk management, right? Poor change management strategies, complexity. But the number one reason is poor requirements. And that's in the research journals. If you want to look that up, it's just the number one reason that projects fail is poor requirements. So this is when a business analyst can really pay off to have on that project, improving quality. Many times organizations don't know they have a problem with their requirements until they get a good BA. I'm sure we've all experienced that. And this webinar is about improving the quality and requirements using business analysis techniques. So let's start with requirement. What is it? If we follow the IIBA definition, it's a usable representation of a need. And now we need to find out what a need is. So a need is a problem or an opportunity to be addressed. And that still doesn't give us enough information about what a requirement is, nor what a quality requirement is. And please, if you have any questions or any comments at all, in my view, I actually can't see the chat, so my apologies. And Steve, I'm going to ask you to please just jump in if you see a question or a comment in the chat, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So in fact, there's a lot of different styles of requirements. I'm sure you know so many of them: the IEEE standards, IIBA, user stories, others. And I also work in procurement, so where the requirements in RFPs are written even differently interspersed with legally sounding language. Dot the I's, cross the T's, because it needs to stand up to legal scrutiny. So there again, another twist on what a requirement is and another question about what quality is. There are literally thousands of resources you can turn to describe any of these requirement formats. You can just look them up. IEEE, IIBA, user stories, thousands of resources. They're all there. So if there's so much information about them, wouldn't that mean that we would know how to create high quality requirements? Shouldn't everybody be doing it? Maybe it's not that simple as knowing what the characteristics are. Maybe there's other factors involved. You might be familiar with these knowledge areas in the IIBA Business Analysis Book of Knowledge, the BABOK. These knowledge areas are a fantastic way to send us in the right direction for requirements quality. No doubt about it. This is a good methodology. We need all of these knowledge areas to get to high quality requirements. So business analysis, planning, and monitoring. If you fail to plan, plan to fail. Elicitation and collaboration, how to get information from stakeholders that are going to go into the requirements. Requirements lifecycle management, so managing and maintaining the requirements once we get that information. Strategy analysis, to identify needs and enable the organization to address those needs. Requirements analysis and design definition, structuring and organizing requirements. Solution evaluation, assessing the performance and value of the solution. In using this methodology, there's others that you can use. And if you go into the systems engineering side, there's a methodology there as well. But in using this particular methodology, because we are members of IIBA here, this is an IIBA event, a typical way to start would be to review the project documentation, the system if it's there, talk to stakeholders, use ChatGPT, AI tools. We're all into ChatGPT or other now. But if it was as easy as following these knowledge areas of IIBA, which are very good, wouldn't we have high quality requirements all the time? So clearly, it isn't that easy, since poor requirements are still the #1 reason that projects fail. There's an entire show that happens before the requirement gets on paper. And we have stakeholders who don't show up, don't review the requirements, or spend 5 minutes doing it. We have people who don't participate in elicitation very well because they're multitasking. They just have so much to do. We also have people who don't know what they want or change their mind. So it's not that easy to get to the Olympic gold medal of quality requirements. And the best way that I've seen it happen after working for 50 companies is by identifying what the issues are ahead of time and having mitigations for them. So let's jump into that. Can you correctly identify the problem? Maybe the problem isn't exactly what you think. So let's say that stakeholders don't show up to our meetings. We think it's because they don't care about providing input. But when we identify that as a risk and we ask the project manager and our project team, how are we going to deal with this risk? They say, oh yeah, that's Joe. Joe has a really heavy load right now. I'll give you a substitute stakeholder. So let's not assume that we know the answer. To get to quality, I'm suggesting that we try a different starting point. Start with what went wrong. What went wrong? That's hard to say. What went wrong with the last time the team tried to create requirements? Was it stakeholder participation? Maybe not there or not enough. Meetings going sideways, going down the rabbit hole. So we're really conducting a continuous improvement activity in a way before we engage in elicitation. So we're diving into the root cause of problems in the past at the beginning. Where do we find this information about what went wrong? Under a rock? No. We begin by asking our project manager, project team, stakeholders, other people involved in creating requirements. And I would suggest reaching out to the most disappointed person, the grumpiest person, the most vocally critical person, and ask them, especially the vocal and critical ones. In this case, they really are your friend and are going to give you all of the problems that they had on the previous projects. So as an example, I worked on a pharmacy project, and it was to replace a large national pharmacy system, the largest in Canada of its kind. And my client told me that they needed to tear out the old system, which wasn't that old, because it ultimately wasn't what they needed. The first question I asked was not, "What are your requirements?" but "What went wrong on the previous project?" So then I learned that nobody was trained in requirements. They didn't know that they didn't know how to create high quality requirements. And they really didn't know until they reached go live and launched the system, and it didn't do what they had hoped. The requirements were very vague, not testable. You could poke a lot of holes in them. So, for example, there might be one like, system can process credit card payments. Which credit cards? Are there any other payment processing methods? Or another one, it might say users can attach documents. Where? What file types? What size of a document? They were also very busy. And so even if they had a background in requirements, they didn't have the time. You can't create high quality requirements if you don't have any time. So bringing me in, a consultant, helped mitigate these issues of not understanding requirements. But knowing where the challenges were in the past, we are mitigating future risk. Because every organization who's having challenges in getting high quality requirements has different challenges, and you need to figure out what problems are still there. Everybody's different. Is it a lack of participation? Are stakeholders busy? They don't care. Stakeholders change their mind. Executive stakeholders change directions. Misunderstanding about the requirement format. Requirements not reviewed. We want to identify the risks on this project to attaining high quality requirements and develop mitigation strategies before we start requirement solicitation. In the case of the pharmacy system, the staff were really busy, and they were too busy to create requirements, which means that they would also be too busy to spend a lot of time with me. I knew that if I could find ways to save them time, this would likely lead to higher quality requirements. Doesn't that make sense? And it's not a solution that somebody would normally recommend. Find ways to help the stakeholders save time to get higher quality requirements. Because I'm removing a barrier to their participation in the requirements workshops in doing so. So how did I do this? There's lots of things that I did. They had no structure, like IIBA advises us, no templates, no methodology. So templates save time and direct the stakeholders to populate content quickly. I did the legwork research and proposed some requirements in advance. So they didn't have to think that much in the first meeting. They didn't have to do the legwork. They didn't have to spend time. I worked irregular hours according to their less busy times, which increased the stakeholder participation. And I typed the requirements on the screen. So their tired and multitasking eyes can see them. And it also means that they're reviewing them at the same time that I'm typing them. I mean, how often do we actually get reviewers' eyes on our content? So this also saves time in your requirements lifecycle. When you have that review live happening on screen as you're writing out the requirement, especially if you have like 10 people in a room, They're all looking at it, all reviewing it. You'll never get that if you send that document out or that link out. So I did things like this. Whatever I could do to save them time, and that directly led to better requirements quality. Isn't that interesting? If you look at a textbook or you ask ChatGPT or another AI, how do you get high quality requirements? Are you going to give them a template, work different hours, type requirements on the screen? Probably not. So the mitigation that you design is specific to that group of stakeholders and the problems that they had. My next point is about systems thinking. And a system is, I guess a formal definition of a system is a set of interconnected and interdependent parts that work together to form a complex whole. And there's a lot of things that can be classified as a system. A smoothie machine, a recliner, an IT system, anything that has interconnected, interdependent parts, feedback loops, complexity, basically. Systems thinking is taking a look at the relationships and the interactions between these parts and their interconnectedness and interdependence. So how does systems thinking help us get quality requirements? In understanding systems thinking in our context, let's take a look at an example requirement, a silly one, okay, to begin with. So let's say our stakeholder requirement is an apple. Stakeholders assume that we know what they mean. We might assume that we know what they mean. And that's really our first point of risk, is assumptions. In fact, we know that apples can be all shapes, sizes, colors, taste, cut, uncut, hot, cold, mashed, frozen. The list goes on. So the requirement is much more complicated than we think. But how do we get to this place? To think about all the system, think about it in terms of a system and to get to those extra requirements. So if we're applying systems thinking, we want to be holistic in our analysis. So maybe instead of an apple, just an apple, we need to ask, why not another type of fruit? What dietary needs are there? Allergies? Does it meet the needs of the company wellness program? We also want to understand interrelationships with other parts of the system. So maybe the health programs of the organization, logistics, getting the apples there, back, storage, how long can we store them? What's our requirement for the refrigerator, freezer, distribution, who, how, what, the 5 W's and how is a good way to get to those questions. And waste. What are we going to do with the leftover apples? We're going to give them away, give them to a food program, throw them out. Thinking of it in terms of a system. So knowing this information would likely lead us to more requirements. So we want to be very holistic in our thinking, end to end. It's almost like doing brainstorming, doing that mind map and thinking of all those different tangents about the apple. Okay. Now, when we look at a real project, quote unquote, healthcare software system, suppose an organization needs a new electronic health record system to improve patient care, streamline admin processes, and ensure compliance with healthcare regulations. So suppose that's the requirement, is a system. The holistic analysis part of it is engaging various stakeholders, doctors, nurses, admin staff, IT professionals, patients, to understand how the EHR will support clinical workflows, enhance patient care, and comply with legal standards. And that's our go-to in IIBA. We try to think of all the stakeholders that this system, these requirements could possibly touch. We want all the users' perspectives and operational contexts, okay? We need to elicit requirements by considering the entire healthcare environment, workflows, user needs, regulatory requirements, technology, infrastructure. That's what we do in the holistic analysis in terms of a system thinking point of view. And in the interrelationships, it's about identifying how requirements are interconnected, including how changes in one can impact another. And this is why we do traceability in requirements. So let's say that we need easy data entry. So easy usability in entering data in the system. Well, this data is connected to data security requirements, permissions, access, and reporting, and maybe even other systems if it's shared. Okay. So by recognizing these interdependencies early on, requirements can support a cohesive system rather than isolated functions. Okay. Because isolated functions in silos and not thinking about the system perspective of a requirement and how it impacts and how it connects with another requirement is not leading towards quality, but the other way. So another thing about system thinking is the feedback loop. And we talk a lot about this in IIBA. It's part of system thinking as well. And it's incorporating a continuous feedback mechanism during the requirements elicitation process to refine and improve the requirements over time, giving stakeholders the opportunity to improve those requirements and in an iterative kind of way. And that's the agile way as well, isn't it? So there's a couple other components of system thinking that I won't really get into, but if you know system thinking, it's in relation to emergent and new properties as well as dynamic complexity. So just eliciting requirements with built-in flexibility to accommodate future changes, such as regulatory updates or the integration of new health monitoring devices, for example. So interestingly enough, many of these points are built into the IIBA methodology and knowledge areas. And so this discussion about systems thinking is showing us that if we follow the IIBA methodology in its truest form, we are applying systems thinking. So I don't know about you, but how many of us have read the BABOK after you got your certification and kind of keep it side by side to get the best information about requirements management and lifecycle management. Maybe it's kind of collecting some electronic dust in a way. But the IIBA methodology is definitely very strong if you dig into it and take it away from its theoretical level and into a practical level. And I think that's probably my biggest beef with this methodology is there's not a lot of practical examples because it's so general, and this methodology could be used in any industry, not just IT where I am. So I completely understand the approach and I support it. But it is important to keep digging into this systems thinking. So in summary, there are many different styles and formats of requirements, and quality can be an elusive idea until we understand what it means for our project, for our stakeholders, for our challenges, different than somebody else's. And understand what went wrong as a starting point, applying risk mitigation as a quality strategy, and using system thinking to improve quality. I am happy to reach out to anybody on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to start a discussion around this. If you have any questions at all, I'm going to stop sharing actually so that I can see the questions and answer any questions that you have.
You can use the chat, or if you want to come off mute, just ask your question.
And Vu, it's very nice to see you. We haven't chatted for some time, so it was nice to see you online.
Yeah.
Pamela, could you put your QR code back up? I didn't get it.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. My screen just kept going
Oh,
bonk.
no problem. I see a comment from Laureen who says, I use this format too, very effective. Corrections are made immediately. So I'm assuming that means writing requirements on screen. Is that a good assumption? After I said we shouldn't think about doing assumptions, is that the right assumption?
Oh, yes, that I use the same format. I find it very effective because the stakeholders could see what I'm writing on the screen and they could make the corrections immediately and say, oh, no, that's not what it is. It's the other way. And then they do remember, oh, I missed a step by just looking at it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because everybody's multitasking, and if you miss a minute of a meeting, it might be a really critical minute, and then you come back to the meeting, and if there's nothing on the screen and nothing is being recorded for you to look at, then you've lost that minute, and maybe you've lost that opportunity to give input to that requirement because it's not even there anymore, or it never was. That's the worst thing. Like when I I give a lot of different kinds of webinars all over the world. And one of the things that always surprises me is that some meetings are still held with only kind of one learning mode in mind, verbal. So no PowerPoint, nothing to look at. And so when the majority of people are visual kind of thinkers, or they learn visually, then it's always surprising to me that that method is not accessible to them. And I'm even a excessive kind of visual thinker, and verbally I'm quite low in terms of processing verbal information. And it's always a tough time to follow meetings that are only verbal. So at a minimum, you should always try and aim for verbal and visual to reach your stakeholders, because, if you can optimize the methods and optimize their ability to receive information, then you have also optimized their ability to give you good feedback and your chances to get high quality requirements. So something to think about. It takes a little bit more time maybe to put something together or think that way, but the results are definitely there. Any other thoughts about how you get high quality requirements?
I use the same methodology. The last requirements that I gathered, there was a senior manager there, which kind of impacted getting the information, primarily because her effort was to ensure that everything aligned with, the what do I want to call it? So the way that she manages, if you will, I don't know, but it was kind of counter what we were trying to accomplish. We were just trying to ensure that the requirements were valid and they contained all the information that was necessary in order to deploy a new product. But I guess I don't know. So I guess it all depends. I guess this is a long story to say that ensure that if possible, ensure that just the business people who actually are doing the work help with the requirements, I think. If that all makes sense.
Yes, it definitely makes sense. And sometimes the right method is to to have the right people and not the wrong people involved. But sometimes, you know, especially if that wrong person is a high-ranking person in the organization who really wants to see the requirements and be really involved in that, then maybe the option is to show them the requirements further down the line when business has already is already very happy with them. And so there's less opportunity to change work that the business is actually quite happy with. I think there is a hand up. Sorry, I can't see that.
A good recommendation, thank you.
Yes, hi, Javier. I want to follow up on that, on this thought of making sure that you have the right people when doing the requirement, because a lot of time in a lot of projects, the stakeholders are the ones that having a discussion, and a lot of decisions are being made. Are made by the time it gets to the people that actually could provide the greater impact or influence in the requirements. How do we sort of counter that, or what's the term I'm looking for? Avoid that from happening.
What an interesting problem. So the decisions are already made in advance of elicitation.
Yeah, exactly. Because normally you will have the external consultant or the PM talking to the high-ranking sponsors, and they sort of define, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are the parameters. This is what is in scope. This is not what is not in scope. But then when you actually say, okay, now we're going to launch this project, it's like, okay, then wait a minute, where are the requirements of it? And sometimes when we say, okay, what you're trying to solve in this problem should need include an item that you already decided that is out of scope.
Isn't that interesting? So I was going to ask you how that's working, how well that's working. And it sounds like it's not working well for maybe anybody.
I've come across that in several projects across, not every single project. It's project here, there, across several different companies and industry, from services to manufacturing to IT. In the part what you say where you talk about, let me talk to the most person that was more vocal about what happened before, that can bring a lot of insight. I think the part as I prepare this and move to the part of the requirement, how do I sort of leave the room or set the expectation with the stakeholder that as we are investigating, we may have to revisit some of these decisions that we have made without going into this constant loop situation of decision changing, then make a decision and then changing again, because that also comes into a never-ending trap.
It's very difficult if the organization doesn't want to change. And some organizations haven't gone through enough pain yet in order to want to change. That's number one. But if a certain person or high-ranking or influential person has gone through enough pain and wants to change, then that's a great starting point. We always try to fix something through mitigation rather than after it happens again. And you need to have people who care about this. And if people who sign the checks don't care about it, then it's very difficult to affect change. And sometimes the best way to affect change is to develop relationships with influential people in the organization and on your project, who will give you some ears to listen to the problem. And also having a well-defined problem, I find, helps as well. So going to the people who can make the decision or make the change that you're requesting, going with a well-defined problem with the impacts of that problem to
Okay.
things that management cares about, which is timelines or quality or customer service or these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And then you have an argument, then you have really something to listen to, and going to them with the problem, well-defined problem with options and alternatives and your recommended solution
Mhm.
might be a way that you could go to them if they're willing to listen to a new idea.
Okay. Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's a very difficult situation that you're facing. And if there's no political will, it's difficult to do, but we do it in baby steps, chip away at it.
Just make sure that I don't get completely disheartened.
Yes. Any other comments about requirements, what has worked for you in terms of quality? Have anybody have any other kinds of recommendations? I think we
Um,
have the whole world here, if I'm not mistaken. We've got Canada and the US and New Zealand, and we had England, and I'm not sure who else we have here, but there must be some recommendations that you've used yourself that you'd like to share tonight.
Maybe I can share my view. Also, I make the similar experience like you in regards of requirements that you have to visualize them. And I make often experience when you, for example, only forward the user stories which you have elaborated and defined with the stakeholders and ask them for sign off. 99% will sign off, maybe not even properly check it, and then later on you have the big surprise. Also, I prefer that when we have the first iteration, then in the second meeting, that I visually show them, maybe even in a PowerPoint, how the new screen look like, what's the new function or the new process, and then you get the much better feedback. Maybe you notice something is missed out or you have to amend something, but it's important that it's visualized and that the key stakeholders are participating, of course, but visualization, I believe, is really the key, and that you do it and not easily accept the first. Also, I have often situation that you're under time pressure and you need to sign off, but I prefer really have the proper meeting before we sign off and tick the box and move forward. Yeah.
I love the suggestion. So instead of speeding things up, you slow things down and visualize them. And in doing so, you actually get higher quality and save time and save money because they're doing it once because they understand it so much better than getting an Excel with 100 lines on it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes there is really value in just slowing things down. And I know I had this one manager who spoke really, really quickly and was quite proud of being able to speak so quickly and digest information so fast and spit it out and turn it around. And it was a great skill. But the problem is in a group of stakeholders, you always need to look for the lowest common denominator in terms of being able to understand, you're working with a very diverse group of people. Some are verbal, some are not, some are introverts, some are not. And by just slowing things down and looking at different ways of communicating, you're actually increasing their comprehension. And then, like I said, you are increasing their opportunity to give you valuable and quality feedback, which means that you're going through the circle and the cycle once when it comes to requirements life cycle. Any other comments or tips that you want to share with the group tonight? Okay, so Steve, I think that pretty much is a wrap.
Okay.
Pamela, I do have a question. You talked about the book that you are offering through IIBA. What's the name of that book again?
So there were two books that I spoke about. One
Uh-huh.
is Get the Job. Is that the one you mean?
And that's the one through IIBA, correct?
So the one through IIBA, which is going to be published, not published yet, trying to
Oh,
work
okay.
on, it's my winter project, is going to be on stakeholder interviewing.
Okay.
And I have a background in journalism. I used to train national spokespeople how to interview and be interviewed. And
Mhm.
it's a very dicey, tricky thing. But if you learn the tips and techniques of the people who do it, then much, much easier. And you can bring that into the stakeholder context.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And that can be acquired through the normal outlets, bookstores, Amazon, places like that, right?
In the spring, yes.
Spring, right? Okay, perfect.
Anyone else before we call it a night? We still have to do a raffle, and I have one or two things I want to share from the IABA website. If anybody doesn't have any more questions. Okay, so let me share my screen really quick. Ms. Pam, you were talking about all the different webinars around the world. So I wanted to share really quick. If you go out to the IIBA website, iiba.org, this is their main page. At the bottom, we've got Global Business Analysis Day. It's coming up in November. And then there's some really good resources here if you're looking for career change or looking for a new job. But if you go to events and go to chapter events, I'm going to jump over to this one because I already filtered it. These are all the events that all the chapters are hosting. And a vast majority of them are free. So you can go to events around the world. I'm not sure about this one. This one's tomorrow. But New Brunswick is having a speaker series tomorrow also. Grow with the IIBA with IIBA members. And you can scroll through, you can see there's pages and pages of events. So there's that. So I'm gonna do the raffle here in a second. But I just wanted to share, hang on, where did it go? I lost my Mentimeter. Okay, you guys can see my screen. So we're gonna raffle off one $25 gift card to Amazon, and then we're gonna raffle off this book here. So if you win, we'll send you the actual book or a link to online or whatever your preference is. So actually I wanna stop recording.